Welcome back, everybody. Today, I'm going to teach you how to update pivot tables in Google Sheets. This is really useful when you're working with data that changes regularly and you need your pivot table to reflect those updates accurately. Let's jump right into it. First, open your browser and navigate to workspace.google.com. Once the page loads, log in to your Google account using your credentials. Make sure you're using the account where your spreadsheet is stored so you can access all your files without any hassle. After logging in, you'll land on your Workspace dashboard. Here you'll see all your recent files and folders. Look through your documents and click on the spreadsheet that contains the pivot table you want to update. This will open the file in a new window, giving you full access to all the sheets and data within. Now that you have your spreadsheet open, you should see your pivot table displayed on the page. In my example, I have a sample pivot table set up. To start editing it, look for the small pencil icon located just underneath the pivot table. Click on this icon and then select Edit from the options that appear. This action opens up the editing interface for your pivot table. Once you click Edit, the pivot table editor will appear on the right side of your screen. This panel is where all the magic happens. At the top of this editor, you'll notice the range or source of the data that feeds into your pivot table. In my case, the range is set to numbers A1 to F10. This tells you exactly which cells the pivot table is pulling information from. To update the pivot table, you need to make changes directly to the source data. So, navigate to the sheet where your original data is stored. For this example, let's say we need to change some values in the resting column. Find the cell that contains the number 45 and change it to 12. This simple edit will demonstrate how quickly pivot tables respond to changes in the underlying data. After making that change, switch back to the sheet with your pivot table. You should immediately see that the data has updated to reflect the new value you entered. This shows how dynamic pivot tables are when the source data changes. Now let's go back to the source sheet again to try something else. This time, we'll add a new row of data. Right-click on any row except the last one, and you'll see options like Insert one row above or Insert one row below. Choose one of these options and then input some new data into the newly created row. Once you've added this new data, return to your pivot table to check if the new information appears. You'll likely see that it has been included automatically, which is exactly what we want. However, here's an important point to note. If you add data after the very last row of your original range, you might notice that it doesn't appear in the pivot table. This happens because the range specified in the pivot table editor doesn't include that new row. To fix this, you need to adjust the range manually. Go back to the pivot table editor and look at the range setting. In my example, the range ends at F11, so I need to change it to F12 to include the new row. After adjusting the range, you'll see that the newly added data now appears in your pivot table. And that's it. You've successfully updated your pivot table in Google Sheets by both editing existing data and adding new rows. If you found this video helpful, please leave a like, subscribe, and see you in the next video.